Hi, everybody. It's Chris Coulter with David Grayson for the next episode of our All In the Sustainable Business podcast. Hi, David.
Hi, Chris.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Hope everyone else is.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're well, and I'm doing well as well. And Mark is on vacation, so he's doing exquisitely well right now. But we have two phenomenal guests who have both been on the pod before, and we're thrilled to have you back. Aron Cramer, CEO and President of BSR. Hi, Aron.
Hey everyone.
And where are you today, Aron?
I'm at home in Berkeley, California.
Wonderful. What a beautiful place. And Tensie Whelan. Hi, Tensie. And now your title has changed a little bit. You were the founding director for the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU Stern School. Now you're the distinguished professor, of course, highly distinguished, Professor of Practice Emerita, and a senior advisor to the Center for Sustainable Business at the NYU Stern School. Did I get that right?
You got it perfectly, and we'll do it with you all.
I practice it all night to get it right. But we're two old friends and two remarkable leaders on sustainability. And we thought we wanted to invite Aron and Tensie together in particular to try and unpack a little bit this thread of a conversation that has always been around corporate sustainability and the sustainable development agenda, but has peaked in the last 2 or 3 years and as an ongoing discussion, debate, preoccupation even perhaps on this idea of the business case for sustainability or business value from sustainability. And maybe before we even get into some specifics, and Aron, BSR and GlobeScan released a report in February on this subject, which we can kind of get into a little bit, but maybe we almost want to frame how do we understand this preoccupation or this focus? And Tensie, how are you seeing the business case discussion and why it's so, acute right now?
Well, I think first of all that we've made a mistake in the movement to not incorporate the business case from the beginning in terms of how we talk about sustainability. Sustainability has been siloed as not part of business strategy because we talk about it differently. We talk about it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but not in terms of energy cost savings, for example. And I got fascinated with this challenge actually way back when I was working in Central America as a journalist on environment and development issues, and then sort of seeing some of the challenges when we didn't think about economics and economic development tied to conservation, right? And how, for example, if you boycott deforestation or beef, right? What happens is not that the deforestation stops when you boycott the beef, but people are now cutting it down for their food, right? Because they need to live. And so I got very interested in this economic element. And so when I went and ran Rainforest Alliance, that's what we saw is that as you work with supply chains all over the world, sustainability practices actually improve the financial performance of everybody in the entire supply chain, from farmer to trader to retailer to brand. And so I think that we need to, as sustainability leaders, not shirk away, not pretend, talk about actually, in fact, sustainability as a form of good management. And it helps us both manage risk, which means avoided cost, and also invest in opportunities that will drive revenue and efficiency.
And maybe before we go to your take, Aron, why do you think the economic piece of it was sort of forgotten or removed? Because the origin of it, and especially John Elkington's triple bottom line, had environment, social, and economic. And so it was always theoretically there, but I wonder why we didn't include it more practically.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, well, first of all, I think one of the challenges has been the whole ESG framework. If you think about it, environmental, social, and governance, what's it missing? It's missing profitability.
Yeah.
Right. So those acronyms and focusing on, frankly, a reporting and compliance mode, as opposed to a business strategy mode where you're embedding sustainability into business strategy to drive better societal performance, but also better financial performance. I think we kind of went off the rails a bit, And we can talk about this later, but I think the compliance metrics are really problematic in terms of driving environmental and social performance. They're very process and output based. They don't drive better performance from a societal perspective or a financial perspective in many cases, to some exceptions. So I think that's been part of it. And then also, honestly, and this is something I see in corporates as well as in NGOs, sustainability people don't understand finance. They can't talk the language of finance. So finance people don't believe.
So boring.
Right. Well, there is
so
that.
dull. Great. Aron, what's your sense of the framing or the origin of this kind of conversation?
It's such a good question. I mean, I think I'll answer it through the lens of past, present, and future. I think in terms of the past, look, how did this whole concept take flight? As corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. It is your responsibility as a corporation to society. That says nothing about business value. So I think, it was what it said on the tin, as they say. And I think the ideas originated from, the 1968 generation that wanted to make the world a better place through business. They didn't come about saying we want to have stronger, more resilient, more purposeful businesses. So I think the reason why this landed on the agenda in the first place, I think, sowed the seeds of some of this. But I think a lot's happened since then, and I think right now there's been, in the survey that BSR and GlobeScan worked on, or the project we worked on late last year, late 2025, I think uncovered some of this. Why is it resonant right now? And from our member companies at BSR, we're hearing almost universally, we have to demonstrate more business value. We have to demonstrate more business value. Why is that happening? I'm a little bit of a skeptic and maybe even a cynic. I think that many of the questions that are coming from companies are well-placed and good ones and tied to exactly what Tensie's speaking about. Some of it's not on the level. Some of it is backlash through other language. Some of it is treating sustainability differently and frankly more unfairly than other aspects of the business. I've long felt, business leaders want to push sustainability teams to demonstrate business value. If only marketing were subject to the same rigor, yes. And lots of other things. So I think right now we're living in a moment where demonstrate business value is actually a more legitimate way of saying we don't believe in sustainability to begin with, and we're going to hold you to a different standard. So I think we have to recognize that some of what's going on is not on the level. Some of it is business leaders who were never bought in during the period of great momentum at the earlier part of this decade. And some of it is from business leaders who are exhausted by the whole compliance fire drill that, has been conducted over the last few years. So I think it's sort of two cheers for focusing on business value. Yes, it's important. I would never suggest that it's not. But I think some of it right now is death by 1,000 cuts that is not on the level.
And I'd like just to push back a little bit on this. We didn't spend time on the business case sometimes. It's not that many years ago when I was hearing lots of company people saying, do we still have to carry on making the business case? AD Little and Business in the Community, the business case report back in 2002-3. We did a Cranfield. We did a repeat of that with Business in the Community in 2011. Andrew Winston was writing a lot about saying in Big Pivot, you've got to make a case in terms of embedding sustainability, whether it's risk reduction or cost cutting, or it's building new product, new business opportunities, or it's related to build reputation. And of course, we may have, I think we probably do have some criticisms of the shared value model, but Michael Porter was trying to make that argument with Mark Cramer, and earlier Jane Nelson and Ira Jackson were doing something similar with their sustainable value or SAV2, sustainable added value, shareholder added value. So what went wrong in this last few years? Can we simply say it's backlash plus this overswinging of the pendulum on the way that compliance has been enforced, or is there something else as well that we weren't good enough as sustainability professionals in really being able to help individual companies to articulate what it meant in their case? Because what it means for a gold mining company is very different to what it means for a big tech company.
Yeah, maybe if I can jump in on that. I mean, so first of all, I agree with Aron that sustainability is held to a different standard, right? That is absolutely the case. And not only marketing, if you just look at AI as another example, throwing wads of money on it with no
To be sure.
Yep. But what I would like to underscore is that we really haven't, when you look corporate by corporate and you look at the tools out there, our return on sustainability investment methodology, which we started developing about 10 years ago when I came to Stern, there really wasn't much that goes to that kind of granular level of where you're figuring out how, in fact, circularity is driving very specific types of financial value, or how decarbonization is, or how health and safety investments are. And over again, even companies that have well-developed sustainability programs have not put in place the ways to track the financial returns. And to me, that is also a double standard, because you have to track the financial returns of every other investment. So why haven't we been doing it for sustainability? Because we think of it as different. We think of it as CSR, as you said, Aron. But in fact, and I should say, that just like anything else, you don't always have a return. You should be investing in some of these things, whether or not you have a strong return on investment. But the fact is, they don't even know. I mean, over and over and over again, I see companies not understanding that, in fact, this investment in sustainable supply chain has reduced their risk and by X amount, which we can show them with another company that had a risk event in their supply chain and the drop in valuation and so on, right, as an example. So I think the rigor. One other thing I would say, which to me has been fascinating when we've looked at the return on sustainability investment with companies, is that there's nothing better than applying a financial lens to understand how mushy a company's KPIs are. Because when we look at what kind of impact they're going for, if it's in terms of, I have a policy on X, or I've trained X number of people, right? You cannot monetize a policy. You can only monetize the outcomes of a policy. So for me, I find over and over again that there's these very kind of mushy kind of configurations of what they're trying to accomplish, and that actually applying a financial lens makes you more rigorous in your actual societal impact, because it forces you to figure out how to manage this qualitatively as well as quantitatively. Again, not everything needs to be put through that lens, I want to stress, but we don't do it at all now. Even those sustainability leaders, and the tools aren't there, and other than what we've been doing, and there's some other organizations, but not at this kind of granular level. So to me, this is a big miss, and one where we are really beginning to see companies take this on. And it's been fascinating. We're doing a lot of work in private equity, and I don't want to, let's come back to that, because they are all about the money. And so we're seeing some really interesting investments there and sustainability linked value creation. So we should come back to that at some point.
It's a great question, David. And before talking about what maybe we've gotten wrong, let's talk about what we've gotten right. The first finding of the project that BSR and GlobeScan did was actually the core elements of the so-called business case haven't changed that much. Yep. And we started out with a hypothesis that the business case had changed, that definitions of business value had changed. And working with 17 companies, doing a lot of research, a lot of dialogue, we concluded, no, actually most of what has been relied upon as the business case is actually pretty solid. So we should start with that. That said, I do think we've got some things wrong. I'll tell a story of a conversation I had with the chief sustainability officer at a company that was getting pushback. This is now, I think, 2 years ago, from the company's board, very large company, on the climate targets. And so she told me the story of how she said, we're getting pushback from the board. She went to her team. Well, how do we address this? And the team's, immediate response was, just show them the climate science. Wrong answer. Wrong answer, because A, they knew the climate science in this instance, but B, that's not what is going to win the day. This is a company that relies, it's in the food business, relies on natural resources and inputs that are put at risk by climate. And that's the argument. So we've constructed sustainability teams. This is something that I think we've gotten wrong. We've constructed sustainability teams that sometimes look a little more like activists than analysts. And I'm hardly against the activism part, but sometimes we in the sustainability world are speaking a foreign language when it comes to conveying some of this. So that's one. The other is, I think we have to acknowledge that over the last several years, companies have put a lot of money into an energy transition that now looks a lot more complicated and expensive than it did before. I don't like that fact, but it is a fact, and I think we have to grapple with it. And also this bit about the spending of tens of millions of dollars inside companies to prepare for regulation that, as someone has already said, didn't deliver any better outcomes. And I think that's created a massive amount of exhaustion. I've had more than one company person say to me, my credibility is kind of dented by the fact that I was saying to our company, we need to invest in this regulation, and now the regulation has deflated a bit or slowed down. And now, of course, companies have been part of the reason why the regulations have slowed down. So, it's a little bit like it's a kind of a dark joke, but someone who kills their parents and then throws themselves on the mercy of the court because they're an orphan. I mean, it's companies have had agency in deflating the regulations, but nonetheless, those are also stranded assets that have been generated. So sustainability teams have lost some of their credibility based on that. I think those teams are victims, not perpetrators of the situation, but nonetheless, it's a reality. So I just think, look, we've been through. I'm stepping down from my role leading BSR later this year. We've been through a total roller coaster in the 2020s with disruption after disruption after disruption. And in a volatile environment, sticking to one particular argument is hard because the framework conditions are changing so radically. So the calculations are changing radically, but it doesn't mean the calculations weren't good to begin with. And I think that's a nuanced argument that can be hard to make successfully inside companies.
So if we, on one hand, and this is a caricature, but we placed activists to a degree, somewhat almost anti-business mentality inside companies as leading either corporate social responsibility or sustainability.
I don't know about anti-business. I would say
constructively critical friends of business.
Let's say business agnostic in some ways.
Okay. Yeah. But people. The early round of heads of sustainability in many companies were not what you would say Fortune 5. They didn't graduate from your two institutions and want to make a ton of money. That wasn't their motivation. So they weren't typical business people, I wouldn't think.
They didn't come up through the ranks of operators inside companies.
Yeah. And then we went into a realm where many of the key role was compliance, so very accounting mindsets that had to shift. And now we're in this enterprise-centric, value creation business. And so each of those, I think, are all like part of the elephant, not the full story. And of course, we have to be all those things at once, as well as other translators, diplomats, anticipatory issues managers, all these kinds of things. So it feels like we get these singular moments when there's a blended requirement over time. And I think to your point, Aron, on the work that we did in the report, there were like 6 foundational drivers of business value from sustainability that hadn't changed. Probably going back to everybody's business too, David, with you and Adrian wrote in the early 2000s?
2001.
2001. So reflecting on that, like how much of a financial or business centric argument was in everybody's business? Do you recall?
Well, the long title was Managing Risks and opportunities in today's global society. And it was trying to move the debate on from just seeing this as responsibility, because that was the heyday of CSR. We deliberately didn't have the word corporate social responsibility or CSR in the book back then, but we were trying to absolutely relate it into business. And so a key part of the book, even back then, was looking at what did all this mean for people working in procurement or in finance or in R&D or in marketing and so on.
So just to add in here, I think one of the challenges we have with the sustainability people not necessarily being core to the business strategy or have good financial chops is that I find companies don't understand the cost of, for example, the inputs they use. So, the amount, if you're manufacturing or agriculture, the amount of money that you need to spend on water is accelerating. The risk of you having a stranded asset in a factory in a water risky area is accelerating. There's no monetization of those things happening, right? The embedded carbon, because again, we talk about it as embedded carbon in a regulatory or GHG framework, and not in terms of embedded cost, right? We don't understand how much cost is actually embedded in transport, packaging, manufacturing, et cetera. And so I think that as an example, let's just talk about circularity, which I think is a financial superpower, right? And so if you think about circularity, it drives operational efficiency because you're buying less virgin product and you're paying less to dispose of what's left over. You can, in some cases, you have a second bite at the apple when you're reusing components or the entire product. You have access to new markets. As an example, through eBay, they now have co-branded stores and apparel, Lululemon, let's just say, and Lululemon is now reaching an entire new demographic globally that they never reached before through their pre-loved apparel and getting a second bite at apple. So you get new demographics. You also are less exposed to tariffs if you're in the United States. Renault is putting 40% of new car components, used car components, into new cars. GM and Ford just took $3 billion worth of write-downs due to tariffs. If they'd been putting 40% of used car components back into new cars, they would have not been exposed to tariffs. Let's also talk about circularity and how it reduces your supply chain resiliency. When I sat on the board of Aston Martin, if we couldn't get a car component, we couldn't make the car. You're sourcing thousands of car components from all over the world. If you're putting some of it, not all of it, but some of it back into your car, you now have far less exposure to that type of geopolitical risk or transport risk or even extreme weather risk, right? And so there's just so many different elements when you understand what the key drivers are of different strategies in different industries and also for different value chain partners. And you have to get to that level of granularity in order to really drive financial understanding and uptake and benefit, right? And I think that's also been one of our challenges is, yes, we know what the key drivers are. Their operational efficiencies, their market demands, their stakeholder and reputation management, et cetera. But companies and we, like as a movement, have not been sort of systematically tracking those across industry, across events, across strategies, to understand where that financial value is. And that's what's beginning to change, which is exciting.
And I think there's both micro and macro examples of all this. There's a couple of macro examples that I think are super interesting. What is the European country that has been least affected by rising energy costs since the war in Iran began? Spain. Why is that? Because Spain has made a significant move away from coal and towards solar. And so, the country of Spain feels a little bit like I do because I drive an EV that's powered by solar. There's a little bit of, the Berkeley, California flex there for you.
So woke.
So woke. It's horrible, except it saves me a lot of money. Spain is David, I think you spent a lot of time in Spain. You would know this. That's a great success story, and maybe the world will learn a lesson from the latest energy shock because we've been having them for over 50 years. We don't seem to learn very much. I've been thinking a lot about how AI has some similarities to the anti-sweatshop movement in the late 90s. And that became a sort of catch-all for what the public didn't like about business and its sense of powerlessness. And I think the pushback on data centers right now is partly about data centers, but it's actually it's a symbol of everything, every way that the average person feels powerless in the world's economy right now. And that should be a blinking red light or a flashing red light for businesses, and not only the hyperscalers, but I think others, because if you want to go talk to someone who was at Nike in the late 90s, they can tell you how this can spin totally out of control. So this is one on the risk management side, but I think there are multiple dimensions of things. And you can think you're managing something, and then it just explodes into something that's unmanageable. And I think when it comes to the AI revolution, I think that's even bigger. And the backlash against business, I was talking to one of our members just this morning who's very worried about this. And the backlash is potentially monumental and could go directly to the bottom line in ways that we may not be expressing. So I just wanted to build on what Tensie said, agreed with every word. And I think that practicality, without that, you've got nothing. But I think it's not only those examples. I think it is this bigger set of questions that I'm not sure business is so good at anticipating and dealing with, frankly.
Aron, I don't want to derail the conversation on this important discussion about business case, but just for our non-North American viewers, listeners, I think a little bit more on this backlash, which is building in the States in particular against data centers, would be really helpful for listeners, viewers in the rest of the world.
Well, in short, there have been, I forget the number, but I think it's about 30 data center projects in the United States that were canceled or delayed substantially in the second half of 2025. And that was significantly up from the first half. And it's about energy, it's about noise, it's about water, it's about land use, and it's about the average person's energy bill. And so there are some very practical reasons why this is happening, and it's happening, even people outside the United States, I think, know something about the red-blue divide. It's happening in some of the reddest parts of America, but it is at risk of becoming something that goes well beyond those specifics that affect individual communities, and a sense that, as someone smarter than I am put it recently, AI is happening to people. It's not happening with people. Yes. And so it is politically quite toxic. My BSR colleagues who live and work in Europe, and David, you can speak to this, are saying they're starting to see some signs of this. Tensie, you know Latin America very well. In Latin America, there's a lot of pushback in Mexico and South America. So I don't think that the pushback against data centers will stop at the borders of the United States. And I think it is, again, it's one of these things that's both very practical but also highly symbolic, and that becomes somewhat volatile.
I think the symbolism is so critical because I think the history of this, and I mean, I think corporations, we know these are organisms to a degree with lots of different incentives and carrots and sticks that they respond to. So I think it's a very adaptive agenda. Companies adapt to the current context, and the exogenous events that have happened, like the sweatshops, like the anti-globalization events, the desensitization of climate impacts and things like that. These things move the companies in certain ways. And I do think the AI data center is all part of the inequality agenda and the affordability crisis and us versus them and the 0.01% versus the rest. So all of this, I think, is quite potent and powerful, and who knows where it's going to go. And I do think that the reputational impacts, combined with all the 2030 targets that business is collectively going to miss, and we are all going to collectively miss when it comes to the SDGs, is there any reckoning around that? Of, you said you were going to do this is the situation, what do we do, and where does populism drive that agenda going forward? And I think business, as you were saying, business is very poor at factoring these scenarios into it because it's such a short-term incentive structure on investment. As long as capital is flowing, then we keep it going, and we'll adapt to those new conditions. But those conditions are probably going to be quite different in a couple of years.
And the incentives to chase both the revenue and cost reductions coming from AI are massive, and because it's the way public capital markets work. There's no company that can say, we're going to wait it out and see how this plays out. That's just not, you can't sell that story to your investors.
Yeah. Can we go back to the BSR GlobeScan report from back in February? You've got a couple of examples in there from Applied Materials and Valley Base Metals, and both of them large businesses, have a sustainability function, etc. Does the basic argument of the report scale down for a mid-sized company that doesn't have a strong sustainability team?
What do you mean by scale down, David? Does the opportunity lower in a smaller company?
No. Can it equally apply effectively, Aaron, do you think, to medium-sized companies which don't have that kind of pulling together, convening, internal consultancy, bit of coaching, etc., that a good sustainability team can do?
After Aaron has addressed this, I can bring in our experience with these mid-market companies we've been working in with PE. But Aaron, please.
I mean, in brief, and then I'm happy to pass to you, Tensie, I think the lessons apply, David, equally, but the agency to take action is, as you are implying, it is somewhat less. And so that's my very superficial way of putting it. I think, if you take the example from Valley Base Metals, even junior mining companies are going to face the same kinds of questions. But the infrastructure they have, the resources that they have are not the same.
Yep. Tensie?
Yeah. So one of the things that we find with smaller, mid-sized companies, depending on what sector they're in, of course, is that if you frame this in terms of operational efficiency or market demand, they are investing against those things, right? And so working with a portfolio company of CD&R, which is a big PE firm, mid-market company, active. I wanted to give a European example, David, for folks there. So active in UK and Ireland, building facilities company. They're investing in electrifying their fleet and decarbonizing their supply chain. As a result of that work, there's a lot of efficiencies for them in terms of the electric vehicles and also the people time associated with that. But in addition, we actually monetized the avoidance of losing RFPs, right, from companies that were looking to decarbonize their footprint, as well as the opportunities for new business based on kind of looking at RFPs and sort of some real numbers around that. And so what we saw was there was $39 million pound benefit to them over 5 years of investing in these activities, right? And we see this as well with every type of, again, of mid-market company that we've looked at, apparel, food, et cetera. One of the nice things about the smaller companies is that they can be a little more nimble than the big companies. And again, when it's in that language of finance, there's areas that they're making investments in regardless. One of the things I wanted to make, though, a point I wanted to make about private equity, which is interesting, is the piece that you talked about, Chris, of not having enough experience support for how to do that is something that private equity, if they see it as part of operational excellence and improving valuation at exit, can invest in, right? And so what we're seeing is companies like Apollo and CDR and others investing in operational people with sustainability background to work with these mid-market companies to drive better performance financially through sustainability. And putting in place some of the tools. So that's why we've been working with them, because they don't really have the tools to help those companies actually get down to brass tacks around the financials. So I think that this is an area where we need a lot more work, David, but it isn't that you have to be big to be able to drive financial value from sustainability. You just are going to do it in a different way.
Just one brief point to add. I think there's one example also drawn from PE that I think is really interesting, which is KKR has made employee ownership a major platform with some of their portfolio companies. You don't see that. Paul Pullman didn't do that at Unilever. You don't see that in large companies. So I think there is maybe a little more latitude also in smaller companies because you don't have to move hundreds of thousands of employees to do things and so on. I don't know if that's the exception that proves the rule that you don't see a lot of innovation in smaller companies, especially tied to PE, but I think it's a great example of what can happen, and in this instance has.
Yeah, and just to add to that, which is really fascinating with KKR, in addition to the employee stock ownership plan, which they say is really increasing their multiples, like getting 10 times multiples, et cetera, at exit. Big surprise. If you give people part of the money of selling it, they're going to work harder. I don't know why I didn't think of that. And then you've got them saying that empathetic CEOs is defined by a framework they did with Stanford. Having an empathetic CEO plus this employee stock ownership plan actually drives even better returns. So fascinating, right? That they're looking this way at kind of that soft side of things.
And just for the listeners, the 6 value drivers we identified in the BSR GlobeScan report were things we've referenced here, but just to give them for listeners, one's financial capital, access to capital, human capital, so talent and the employee side of things on productivity and motivation, supply chain resilience, and you referenced that, Tensie, to a degree, the marketplace, what's the demand side of customers and consumers, operations, and that's where efficiency resides, and then social license, which is the reputational aspects. But I think in that, as you said, Aron, we came into that study like, oh, maybe we're missing something. Maybe there's a little jewel under a rock, but in this meta-analysis, it's like the same stuff over and over again. But what I think was novel for me, at least, and my naivete was that the potency of integration as the thing. Like if you can't integrate, all of those value drivers are connected to other functions in the company. So if you can't make the connection like a Lego block, then you can't realize the value. And I do wonder with big companies, the bureaucracy is there, but it's a big deal, and lots of heads of sustainability spend a lot of time walking around to business units and functions and trying to realize that value. In a smaller company, smaller group of people around the table, conceptually it could be realized much more quickly with less bureaucracy and more simplicity if things are structured effectively.
Well, we're on the topic of what we found from this report. I just add 2 things that I think make the business value of sustainability different than the business value of other efforts inside companies. So one is that, and I think it's important, we make the point in this report also that sustainability leaders should be fearless in terms of making these points. One is that sometimes the time horizons for business value are longer for sustainability than they are for some other things. They're not going to deliver more sales next quarter. We had one experience working with a big mining company where it was basically 3 years before they put in place some steps that saw value, and I think there are even longer time horizons that you can find. The other is that I have never believed that what matters gets measured. I think there is a qualitative, not quantitative dimension to the business value of sustainability that we should not be afraid to assert, whether it is, I'll give an example from a European company we work with that made some changes to its DEI policy early in 2025. You might be able to guess why they did that. They happen to have the U.S. federal government as a very large customer, and it created a firestorm of protest inside the company because they said, basically accused, a lot of employees accused the CEO of a complete 180 and questioned the values that both the company and the CEO had. I don't know how to put a price on that, but I'm pretty sure there's a price on that. Yeah. And so I think let's measure what we can, but not make a fetish of measuring things when in fact it's either too long-term or you have to make some qualitative assumptions. I think that's part of the picture. It can't, we've gotten sloppy. We too often make that the picture. It's not the picture, but it is part of the picture. And I think it's important to reassert that.
Some of these, and I agree with you 100%, Aaron, and also some of these intangibles that you're describing. Sorry, can you hear the motor going on? No? Okay, awesome. Some of these intangibles, you can actually, again, monetize. Again, not we necessarily have to monetize everything, but we worked with REI to understand the financial returns associated with their focus on purpose and sustainability. We looked at their annual evaluations from their team members, also exit interviews, et cetera, to understand the correlation. So this is correlation, but the correlation between retention and productivity and what the company stood for. And we were able to go in and monetize and find that, in fact, the retention rate was better against benchmarks. And therefore, we looked at what it would cost them to replace a person, right? As well as the productivity. And we also assessed that to the tune of about 5% of payroll annually. So pretty significant numbers, right? And it is possible to actually put a number to some of these things in ways that companies currently aren't. The other thing I wanted to add to your point, Chris, around integration, is looking at something as, this is where I think companies need to understand how all these things work together, as you said. So just to give you an example, something as simple as putting LED lighting into facilities, right? I find over and over again that corporates aren't putting those in, which just seems like, basic duh, but they're not because of the short-term cost. What we found is, yes, you have the energy cost savings, which they know, right? You also have avoidance of energy pricing volatility, which you could actually plan out. But here's a couple other things. You have significant reductions in maintenance because you're not having to go up top of these tall ladders way up on the ceiling and replace these bulbs every year, right? So 50% more reduction in annual maintenance costs right away, right, that you can start tracking. Also, and this actually came out of some conversations with some of these portfolio companies in PE, reduced incident rate because the lighting was better in the warehouses and factories, right? And you can actually monetize the reduced incident rate. We've looked at that on health and safety issues with a number of different companies. You can look at what it costs you to manage claims in terms of your HR people, what your actual insurance costs are, and what your productivity losses are because people are out, right? With whatever. So you can actually go in and monetize all those things. But you need an integrated approach. You need HR. You need, the health and safety people in that case. You need facilities management and so on to understand and recognize that there actually are these additional values. Otherwise, what happens is the short-term analysis means that they don't think it fits their internal ROI.
Can I just add one quick point to build on that? There's a paradox here. And Chris, I'm thinking of the webinar you and I did with about a dozen chief sustainability officers 2 weeks ago, where a few of them said, well, we're integrating sustainability so much that the kinds of things, for example, that you just spoke to, Tensie, they don't show up any longer as being about sustainability.
I've heard that too. Let's come back to that.
So I found that both really exciting, really depressing, but also really interesting that if sustainability teams do their jobs well enough, if it gets integrated, it no longer, quote unquote, counts as being a sustainability thing. I don't know what to make of that, but it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I've been hearing this now too, actually, in some very recent work I did with some portfolio companies, but also, last year. It's fascinating. So I think it's great in one way, but I think it's problematic in that you're not tying it back to what's actually driving the financial benefits, and therefore you're not going to invest more in it because of the way finance and leadership doesn't think sustainability drives benefit, right? Just a very easy example of this, working both at Rainforest Alliance and now we did some work with Cargill and their farmers. Farmers, when you put in place sustainable practices, they say it's because I'm doing a good job farming. When they don't put in sustainable practices, it's because the weather was bad or something else happened, right? They don't put a way to track that this is actually tied to some very specific things that they are doing or are not doing, right? Because that's not how they work. And oftentimes companies are like that as well because they see sustainability as this piece off to the side. So I think this is an area that we need to address with companies, that with sustainability leads, that they actually need to capture that value with those guys. But I think it's great that they're recognizing it.
I think those are great examples, and it does speak to me. Are we being a bit naive in sustainability? I was at a session in Toronto for Toronto Climate Week, and it was a great panel discussion. But I had to leave, unfortunately. But I wanted to get up and scream because it was very self-flagellation. We've got to get better at business. It was very much our fault. When to me the reality is that we have science on our side of what needs to happen to create to survive as a species. We have a moral and ethical imperative that is things like everyone should be treated with respect and dignity. These are not controversial statements, yet our lack of confidence drives us to like, where's the business? It's all about money. If we just get but it's not all about money. The entire origin of sustainable development was about something much bigger than the micro performance of one particular company out of 85,000 multinationals on the planet. And we seem to have lost our mojo, our ability to see the big picture. And we show up at these debates with a knife rather than a bazooka that others have, and we understand, well, why? Maybe what's the way to recalibrate how we approach this, and do we need a more forceful moral argument to say this is nothing less than the future of the planet and people and all the other living creatures on it?
Yes.
Great.
I think that's right, Chris. I think that's the thing. I think, yes, let's embrace business value. Let's measure what we can, but let's not adopt unfair, false assumptions that actually come from people who want to kind of want to strangle sustainability in the bathtub. I mean, because I think there is a little bit of that. So, yeah, I'm not for self-flagellation. I'm a little worried that now on the Canadian side of the U.S.-Canada border, these violent analogies are being used, though. So bazookas and knives and so on.
Absorbing things, yeah, but from our neighbors. We lost Tensie. That's okay. David, any last reflections and thoughts on this?
So I suppose if we had a CFO on the listening or watching this podcast, what would be the one thing you would want them to do differently, having hopefully got inspired to go and look at some of the work that Tensie's been doing for some time on return on sustainability investment, on the BSR GlobeScan work around rethinking the business value arguments? What concretely is the ask of finance function? Because I think that's one of the critical levers for us to be playing more.
Well, I will say this. I think sustainability is a secret weapon for the CFO at a time of immense disruption, because sustainability teams can anticipate some of the changes that are coming and help a company prepare for them. So we hear a lot, this, that, and the other thing is now a luxury at a time of great change. I think it's the opposite. It is even more indispensable as a way to, again, anticipate changes that are coming fast and furious.
One of the business chairs I worked with many years ago, so David Varney, once said to me that leadership is the ability to be able to spot the weak signals way ahead of anybody else. And actually, the sustainability function, if it's really well plugged in, is sitting on so much data from across the business that can help them, if they're good at spotting the connections and the synergies, can help them to help the company to spot those weak signals. Yeah,
and it's not just data. I don't think, David. If it is the indispensable function of sustainability in the company, it's experience and mindset also that I think gives the ability to see things that others can't. But Tensie, what are your thoughts?
Oh, and
Yeah,
I think you're
just to build on that, the fascinating thing about sustainability leaders is that they actually have to understand the entire organization and how it works. They actually have to bust silos in order to be able to do their job, and they need to understand all the external, as you were saying earlier, the external sort of material threats and opportunities for the business. So the good ones have a really unique strategic sense that I agree 100% with what everybody's just said. Make sustainability teams a secret power for the CFO. However, to really unlock that power, I think the CFO needs to train its sustainability people in the language of finance, integrated kind of committee that manages these business case conversations with co-leads of sustainability, as well as HR, procurement, facilities, et cetera. And I think that the CFO needs to have his FP&A and key kind of finance leads trained in sustainability for that industry and that company, not broadly, not sending them off to climate change school, but like very specific to what they need to understand. And the sustainability people can certainly put that kind of a training together. And then the final thing I would say is that the business KPIs should include sustainability KPIs, and the finance KPIs that they use across the company should be used for the sustainability investments as well as their conventional investments. And their CapEx and OpEx kind of projections need to start incorporating these broader understandings of how sustainability can drive value.
Excellent. Well, lots of work to do. Lots of exciting things to uncover and knit and find more value and impact, which is wonderful. But really appreciate you, Tensie and Aron, joining us. And thanks everyone for listening. And what a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Great to be with you all.
Take care.